Minister in the Office of the Attorney General and Legal.
Madam President, I thank you for yet another opportunity to make a contribution in this most honorable chamber. Madam President, this is an opportunity I will say I do not take for granted and will never take for granted, because God knows with all we say and do in this Senate, may we inspire confidence in our fellow citizens and make a positive contribution, Madam President, for the peace and prosperity of our nation. Madam President, before I support any bill that is brought to this honorable chamber, I always step back, analyze the law, and ask myself, what positive impact, if any, is this piece of legislation going to have on our population? Madam President, you see, there are two simple reasons why I entered into politics, and I will share that with the honorable members of this chamber. The first, Madam President, to be very honest, it carries a name, and that name is Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley. You see, I do believe, and will always believe that my political leader is a leader phenomenal, and it is because of him legislation like this is brought to this chamber. I will never forget on an occasion while discussing young people and the role of young people in our society with the Honorable Prime Minister. He said to me, and I will quote him, he said, "You speak for them in the Parliament, so do a job of that. You have a soapbox that most don't have. Use it." And I'm saying this, Madam President, because every time I'm blessed and privileged with the opportunity to speak in this chamber, I understand that I have a privilege that not many citizens in this country have. And when I come here, it is always my intention, and us on this side of the Parliament, to make a contribution that could only uplift our society. Now, the second reason why I entered into politics, Madam President, is perhaps most relevant to this debate. I genuinely, like all of my colleagues, I'm sure, in this chamber, I genuinely want to serve, and I genuinely want to attempt and help in protecting all of our citizens. Now, all of our citizens and all of our people, Madam President, we understand what that word all suggests. It suggests every creed, every race. It suggests law-abiding and even non-law-abiding citizens. And you heard me correct, Madam President. Even those little bad boys and girls in prison, I recognize that we have a responsibility as legislators to equally protect. Madam President, I was a defense counsel, so it is in my DNA. And I am certainly never going to turn my back on even those who are the perpetrators of crime in this society. But, Madam President, I recognize standing here, I have an equal responsibility to protecting the innocent and the law-abiding citizens of this country. So, when I support and when I place my support towards any piece of legislation brought before this Parliament, Trinidad and Tobago, you can rest assured I will never support and encourage legislation that perpetuates injustices in our society. Because coming from a criminal and a defense background, I understand the importance of protecting the rights of even those little bad boys and them in prison, quote unquote. But now as a legislator, I have an equal responsibility to our law-abiding citizens. And I want to place on the record again, as my colleagues on this bench would have already done, my support for this legislation, for I believe it balances the rights of our perpetrators, protecting their human rights, which they are all entitled to, together with ensuring and reassuring our citizens that the days ahead are going to be better and safer. Now, I immediately want to respond to my presentation. May not be very long today, Madam President, because there are really points that I intend to rebut on. And if time permits me, I will focus on Clause 11 of the bill that appears before us, because that clause is what amends Section 50. It repeals Section 50 of the Sexual Offences Act, introduces a new Section 50, and I believe that is what, that clause in particular is what I call the Scarlet Letter Clause. And for A-levels, there was a book that I did in school that was called the Scarlet Letter. And if I get to that place in my presentation, Madam President, I will discuss what is the comparison between terming this clause the Scarlet Letter Clause. But I want to immediately answer a question respectfully put to this chamber, or a statement made by the Honourable Senator, whom I have the honour of sharing her name, Senator Renuka Rambajan. She asked the question, why can't we sit and wait and then legislate? Honourable Senator, respectfully, I have a 13-year-old daughter and I have a 12-year-old son, and I shudder to think that as a parliament we're prepared to sit, wait and legislate. Because while we are sitting, waiting and legislating, our children are victims to monsters outside there. They are. And I think, I'm not saying that if you're not a parent you don't understand, because people have nieces, they have nephews, we are all connected. But I shudder to think that this parliament will be expected to simply wait and have it right and have it perfect before we present any piece of legislation that has the potential of protecting our vulnerable in society. There's also another statement made by the Honourable Senator. The Honourable Senator stated that we balance the rights of victims while not infringing on the rights of the convicted. It is, as an attorney at law, it's my personal pet peeve not to read articles and not to read from articles. I always prefer to refer to a point of law or case law. But in some reading and in trying to answer to that statement made by the Honourable Senator, I want to quote a 2010 journal published in the Journal of International Criminal Justice, entitled The Rights of the Accused versus the Rights of the Victim. And this particular article, Madam President, it stated the balancing of the victim's participation against the rights of the accused should be inspired by some procedural principle and imperative nature which represents the backbone of international criminal procedure. The presumption of innocence, the right to a fair hearing in full equality, and the right to an expeditious trial, the right to confront and present evidence, and so on. Now, Madam President, it's my respectful view that by virtue of this bill, we strike a balance while we protect the vulnerable. We do not seek to trample, as the opposition seems to think. We do not seek to trample on the rights of the vulnerable. We do not seek to trample, on the rights of the convicted, in that throughout the length and breadth of this legislation, and that is why I want to really get into Clause 11, especially in that Clause 11 that brings amendments to Section 50 of the Sexual Offences Act. That particular section identifies safeguards that has been placed in this amendment that allows for due process. It allows an application for someone it allows the accused or the convicted person, the opportunity to make an application for their name not to be placed on the website. It allows, it speaks, I believe it's Section 52, the new Section 52. It speaks to what happens when someone appeals their conviction, and then it goes on to speak 53 and 4, it goes on to further speak to what is within the contemplation of the court. And even that same mental assessment that we spoke of, those sections all speak to what in my mind is due process. A process that, a provision that allows the convicted person at all time an opportunity to be able to make necessary applications wherever they see fit. So certainly, Madam President, when I get to that section, I will address that point. I want to say respectfully to Senator Thompson, Senator Dylan Remy, Senator Paul Richards, even Senator Dial Singh, I believe, agree and fully support your position that there is a need for rehabilitation in our country. I do honestly believe that. Because yes, I had for many, many years, my clients were persons whom I know the system had failed them. And they had turned to crime and became reoffenders because the system failed them. And I agree with that. And I agree there is a need for rehabilitation. And you all have offered many wonderful recommendations, which I agree with. But I simply want to say to these honorable senators, the need for this rehabilitation, I do not believe it in any way devalues the law that exists and has been presented before this honorable Senate. So while I agree that there is a need for rehabilitation, while I agree that there is a need for restorative justice and all of that, I do not believe that the need for this has devalued the law that appears in its current form before this honorable Senate. And I'm respectfully asking these honorable senators to consider giving the support that this bill requires, because God knows our vulnerable in society are depending on us to do same. Most respectfully, Madam President, I also want to address some statements. Well, I'm not going to spend too much time on the contribution made by Senator Mark. I'm not going to spend too much time addressing flotsam and jetsam contributions. But, Madam President, and I mean that most respectfully. Madam President, Senator Mark, in his contribution, he spoke about the charges register. And there was a constant repetition about the charges register. And respectfully, Madam President, the bill which was sent out for public comments to the Law Association and other stakeholders, that was the bill which made reference to the charges register. The bill that appears in its current form, that appears before this Parliament, makes no mention of a charges register. And what it does make mention of is a person being placed on whether it's the National Sex Offender Register or the Public Sex Offender website. It makes mention to persons being placed on either only if and when convicted of a particular offense. So I just wanted to clear that as a matter of record, and I'm sure that the Attorney General will deal with those issues in his contribution as well. Now, there are 2 points that I want to also address. That was made by the Honorable Senator Lakshmi Dial. Now, the Honorable Senator suggested that and these are points of law, Madam President, just for the public's benefit and for the record. Now, the Honorable Senator suggested that in Section 51, that we revert to a discretionary may. The judicial officer, she said, I believe, is best placed to make a determination whether the information needs to be published. Now, I want to turn to the law of interpretation, Madam President, as it relates to the concept of shall and may in the law. Now, the learning is that the interpretation of shall, Madam President, has been left to judicial construction. It has been persuasively argued, as a matter of fact, that shall may be construed to even mean may when, and these are the circumstances, when no right or benefit depends on its imperative use. And there is case law in the case of Reed and Wellman, Madam President, that supports this position. So I just wanted, as a matter of law, to indicate that notwithstanding the fact that in law, in certain provisions, we may have, there is the existence of the word shall, the learning the law of interpretation is clear as to how even that mandatory word shall can be construed. And this is for, of course, this falls on our judicial officer, the officer of the court, Madam President, to do so. So therefore, Madam President, it is my respectful view in response to the Honorable Senator that this section does not in any way stifle judicial discretion, and it is certainly in keeping with the doctrine of the separation of powers. Another point, the final point before I get into the crux of my presentation, that was made by the Honorable Senator Lakshmi Dayal. Senator Lakshmi Dayal suggested a mandatory requirement for a mental assessment. The Honorable Senator indicated that a report should be done. Now, respectfully, Madam President, the Senator in her earlier, I'm a bit confused because the Senator in her earlier argument advocated against the use of the word shall, and now she wants an obligation to be imposed for a mental assessment in order for a person's name to be removed from the register. Now, Madam President, if I may respectfully take this honorable chamber to section 63(1) of the Act, because we must remember when amendments are brought, these amendments cannot be read in isolation. These amendments must be read in tandem with the entire legislation. So these amendments has to be read in line with the entire Sexual Offences Act. Now, in accordance, Madam President, with section 63(1) of the Act, it is stated that a registered sex offender, and this is what that provision says, a registered sex offender may make an application to the court for his name to be expunged from the register on the basis of compelling reasons. Now, what this simply identifies in law, the existing law, is that he has an option, meaning the convicted person has an option to produce a mental report. By virtue of, because that if it is, that is one of his compelling reasons why he believes his name ought to be expunged. So if we are to read section 63(1), it is clear in the law that if you have an opportunity as an accused, as a convicted person, Madam President, to make an application for your name to be expunged, and the basis of that is to show compelling reasons, if you believe your compelling reason is because of an unsound mind, then this gives you under this particular section, the convicted person still has an opportunity to present to the court, Madam President, a mental report. Now, clause 18, let's turn to the bill now that appears before us. Madam President, clause 18 of this bill that appears before us, it amends section 63 of the Act and replaces the word shall with may in section 63(3). Therefore, again, Madam President, the court may at this time also can request a mental assessment from a psychiatrist and so on. So I also respectfully believe, Madam President, if we were to keep it in a mandatory requirement, this means that for repeated offenders, the court is now obligated to conduct a mental assessment again. So if a man comes before me 20 times, every time this man comes before me, I am mandated as a judicial officer to require a mental assessment. That is madness. That is legislating madness, because what it means is we always complain as citizens, the duration of time. We complain about the criminal justice system. We complain about the length of time it takes for matters to be adjudicated upon. If we are to support a provision that makes this mental assessment mandatory, it means, because we have the recent case that everyone knows about, this man, what I think is 70-something convictions or charges or something like that he had, right? But imagine you have a case in small Trinidad and Tobago, somebody come before you, a repeated offender, 70-something time, and every time this man appears, you're mandated as a judicial officer to wait for his psychiatric evaluation or his medical report. That is legislating madness. And that is why I'm in full support of this medical report not being mandatory. Because we have to, because this is only going to prolong and derail justice. It is only going to prolong and derail the adjudication of this matter, something that Trinidad and Tobago always complains about. The complaint is that we take too long in court, matters are not addressed expeditiously. These are little ways in which we could improve the system. All right? So that was just, Madam President, my effort to respond to some of the statements made by the Honorable Senator Lakshmi Dayal. Now, to the crux of my presentation, Madam President, as I indicated to this Honorable Chamber, my intention is to look at Clause 11. And I will try, well, of course, if time permits, look at Clause 11 in its entirety. Now, Madam President, this particular clause, as I indicated before, my first focus will be on the proposed amendments that Clause 11 brings to Section 50, well, it introduces, a Section 52, 53, and 54. And those are the first sections that I want to focus on. Now, as all of my colleagues, both on the side opposite and here, we have already established that the purpose of this law is to introduce two registers now. We have the National Sex Offender Register, along with the Public Sex Offender website. Now, I know colleagues before myself, throughout the length and breadth of the chamber, Madam President, they would have gone into what the National Sex Offender Register is and what the Public Sex Offender Register is. So, to not fall victim to tedious repetition, I won't get into that. We all understand, Madam President, respectfully, that one of the critical differences that exist between the National Sex Offender Register and the Public Sex Offender website is that on the National Sex Offender Register, that information is held closely to the chest of the Commissioner of Police, whereas the information placed on the Public Sex Offender website, that is what could go viral. That's what the public is aware of. Now, this is where my story and my comparison with the Scarlet Letter comes in. We know that from the time information hits a public registry, especially, and I agree, in a small country like Trinidad and Tobago, one can only imagine the negative implication that can have on an accused who really is remorseful for the crime that he has committed, and for that accused who really wanted to move past some sort of deviant act or criminal act he may have committed in his or her earlier years. Now, the Scarlet Letter, I'm not sure if many of my colleagues read that, but it was a novel in which it was a novel set in the Puritanic society. And in that Puritanic society, I did it for A-levels at Lakshmi Girls Hindu College. And at that time, in the Puritanic society, one of the biggest crimes to have committed was to be an adulteress. And in that particular era, that particular time, what had happened is that the heroine of the book, to make a long story short, of course, she had an affair with a priest, and she gave birth to a child, and you're living in a time where, of course, to conceive without being married was a sin, and the Puritanic society ordered that she wear a scarlet letter A, signifying adulteress, for the rest of her life. So that's to make a long story short. And the point is that she was branded as an adulteress until the end of her time. Her child paid the penalty because the mother was branded as an adulteress. And from the time I read this particular clause, this novel came to my mind because I'm thinking, once this information goes public, you have this person having to wear this scarlet letter, or this scarlet letter is bolstered to their chest for the rest of their life. Well, not for the rest of their life, for as long as the information is on the register. And of course, God one knows the repercussions they're going to have to face. But then, as I look closely at the clause, I said, thank God, because within the parameters of 52, 3, and 4 of the law that appears before us, we are ensuring that the convicted person is not or does not have the burden of carrying the scarlet letter bolstered to his chest for the rest of his life. And what do I mean by that? If we look, Madam President, at the proposed, now Clause 11, which proposed amendments, brings proposed amendment 52. If we look at that particular amendment, Madam President, it reminded me of the case of Ashingdane versus the United Kingdom. And one of the learning that came out of that case, a little quotation that I liked. It said, "A fair balance must be struck between the demands of the general interest of the community and the requirements of the protection of the individual's fundamental rights." And this particular clause, 52, it provides an avenue for the convicted person to make an application to the court.
Minister, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. It gives the convicted person an opportunity to make an application to the honorable court if they do not want their name to be placed on this public sex offender website. Unlike the book, The Scarlet Letter, she had no choice in the matter. But our convicted persons in this scenario, Madam President, they have an opportunity if they have reason, and of course they must convince the court as to why their name ought not to be placed on the public register. And what this does is that this is where in the law we have created that balancing act. And it comes back to when I began this debate. I recognize, having been a defense counsel, our responsibility to protecting even those whom are convicted of criminal offenses. Because you have convicted of criminal offenses, save and except for your right to movement and all of that, if you're incarcerated, a person's right remains intact. And I understand more than ever that there is a need to protect that person, and I respectfully submit to this honorable chamber, Madam President, that 52 provides that opportunity. Now, 53, Madam President, it speaks about the issue of an unsound mind. And this, Madam President, what that particular clause does is that it gives a discretion, of course, for the court now to request a mental assessment of the person appearing before them. But more than that, 54 is what is important, because this actually identifies what will be within the contemplation of the honorable court in deciding if they're going to grant the application to the convicted person. And the application, if so, you make an application to the honorable court that your name not be placed on this public sex offenders website. The court we now are prescribing and creating parameters in which the court can assess this application that appears before him, the judicial officer, and make a determination as to whether or not this person, the application should be granted. And this, in my respectful view, Madam President, this particular section, 54, we are actually codifying to an extent the principles and the dicta that came out of that case, the State versus Everton Joseph. That is the case that has been discussed in some detail in this honorable chamber, that case that the Honorable Justice Hayden Sinclair Douglas would have adjudicated upon. Now, so Madam President, with this being said, I want to respectfully say, Madam President, that when this bill becomes law, the hiding grounds for these sexual predators, Madam President, will be taken away. They will now be forced, Madam President, to walk in broad daylight, and their identities would be known to all members of the public. But at the same time, as responsible legislators, we have ensured that every convicted person is given an opportunity, if they believe that there are compelling reasons and substantial reasons why their name ought not to be placed on this public register, they are still provided with the opportunity to make said application. Then later on in the bill, we spoke about what happens when the convicted person appeals their conviction. We understand once an appeal is filed, automatically the court is stayed from placing your name on the public register, the public it's the public website, sorry, Madam President. So I ask the members of this honorable chamber to understand that we have been very responsible as a government in drafting this legislation. We have ensured that we have balanced well the rights of the convicted persons with the obligation and right we have as legislators to protect the vulnerable in our society. And to that extent, Madam President, I support this bill. I support the Attorney General, and I do ask the members of this honorable chamber to give the government, give the people of Trinidad and Tobago the legislation that they desire, because certainly it has the potential to protect our vulnerable. With these few words, Madam President, I thank you.
Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam President. May I start off by thanking my colleague, the Honorable Renuka Sagran-Singh Suklal, for an excellent contribution on the law. She has made my task tremendously easier with a very well-positioned research and response to the issues raised.